Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And once again, right, dealing with the election games, as I called it in my last lesson, you have you have an article here, right, which from Zero Hedge, along with many other signs, pointing towards this upcoming election, and really like the weeks and months after that. Okay, now in this article, the headline reads, "Is the left preparing for war if Trump wins?" And it's a very interesting article. I want to read through it a bit and just draw out some of the points here, because we have to watch and see ultimately how things turn out. But at least with the way that it's going, who knows, right? It sure does look like a divided country. Okay, and both sides are pushing the line of what's, I guess, considered okay, right, when it comes to the opposing one another, right? You have some sides that are even calling for violence and pretty much normalizing taking extreme actions in the name of an extreme cause, right, or extremely justified cause. So it says here, the propaganda campaign labeling Donald Trump as an aspiring dictator determined to use the military and national security apparatus against his political opponents is designed not to affect the upcoming election, but rather to shape the post-election environment. So there's this narrative where they're pushing the idea that Trump he wants to be a dictator. He wants to use the military to go after his political enemies and control everything. And so they're setting up this scenario, right? As we read through this article, you'll hear how they're aiming for inciting so many protests and riots and uproars that then Trump declares the Insurrection Act, and then this leads to an even greater divide, particularly in the military, right? Because then you have one side that is not going to listen to what Trump is saying by declaring the Insurrection Act, and the other side that does, and so on and so forth. Now, keep in mind, right? I think it was this year. You had the movie Civil War that came out. Movie was you know what I'm saying? It wasn't all that, but the concept or the idea, still remains, falling under the predictive programming, basically, right? So it says here, it is the central piece of a narrative that criticizing Trump as a tyrant, indeed likening him to Hitler, establishes the conditions for violence. Not just another attempt on Trump's life, but political violence on a massive scale intended to destabilize the country. And that would definitely be a very interesting turn of events in a country like America, to have that kind of political turmoil that gets so bad that now you have the country in a state of disarray. As I write in my forthcoming book, but keep in mind, this is what they want, right? They want to when I say they, I mean above one side, Republicans or Democrats and all that. I mean the hidden hand, right? The puppet master pulling the strings. What they want is that chaos, because it justifies the reforms that they need to bring, or that they want to bring, but they need a very justified reason, similar to what we'll read in this article, right? So it says here, Democratic Party research and media reports show that many senior party officials and operatives are preparing for the possibility of a Trump victory, Accordingly, planning is focused on undermining the incoming president with enough violence to rock his administration. So they're saying if Trump ends up winning, then the plan is to incite so much chaos, so many protests, so many riots that it just it brews a level of violence that will then lead to further action. Prominent post-election scenarios forecast such widespread rioting that newly elected president would be compelled to invoke the Insurrection Act. And you can read about the Insurrection Act, find out a bit more about what it is and what it entails. With some senior military officials refusing to follow Trump's orders, according to the scenarios, the U.S. armed forces would split, leaving America on the edge of the abyss. Now, keep in mind, this could also very well not happen, right? It could also turn out that maybe Kamala Harris wins or Trump wins, and the country does not turn into World War III or a dystopian, um, civil war like movie. Maybe not right away, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it just you have some riots, but maybe not on the scale that people are anticipating. That is also a possibility to keep in mind, right? And that's why ultimately all of these things are things to keep in mind, right? And to pay attention to because it could very well happen. But at the end of the day, as Yahushua said, we have to watch and pray and see what ends up happening. Though we know according to prophecy that it will lead to the things that we read of in, for example, Second Ezra, the 15th chapter, right? Or Second Ezra, the 16th chapter, and many other scriptures pertaining to the times that we're living in now. By vilifying Trump as a despotic madman who must be stopped before he can commence his reign of terror, the regime's propaganda apparatus not only slanders Trump, but also preemptively threatens the reputation as well as the livelihood and perhaps the liberty of current military personnel. So they're really hoping to like the mindset, if I can't have it, nobody can. Now, what's also interesting is I just posted I just put a post up on YouTube where you have where was it? Is it Kentucky or I forgot the state? But apparently now they're saying on the voting machines when you try to press to vote for Trump, it doesn't select, and then eventually you keep pressing and then it automatically selects Kamala Harris, right? So it's interesting is whether that's some underlying design, right, programmatically that they've done, or maybe it's just that one specific machine that's not working right, or who knows. But once again, that's why I called it the election games, because there's so much around you know there's so much around this voting, this and illegal votes here, and so many things that they can use to say yay or nay or X, Y, or Z, right? So adding that level of confusion now gives them wiggle room to you know to push different narratives depending on how things turn out. So continuing from where we left off, the point is to push the military against Trump. When the time comes to act, will you stand for democracy or side with a tyrant who sees the military only as an instrument to advance his personal interest? So that's like the picture that they paint. And you see the drama that comes with politics, right? And also the danger, at least with what we're seeing here. For instance, last week's Atlantic editors-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, quoted former Trump administration officials claiming that the Republican candidate is contemptuous of America's armed forces, and according to Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, wishes he could command the same respect that Hitler commanded from his general officers. Just interesting. I'm going to jump through here a little bit and try to get to the, some other important points in here. Um, right, so it says the purpose of the Hitler narrative. This is sort of what I mentioned a little earlier, right? The purpose of the Hitler narrative is not to alter the electoral preferences of left-wing media audiences already solidly in the anti-Trump column, but rather to justify taking extreme measures against the Republican candidate and the America First movement and ensure that the bulk of the military sides with the anti-Trump plot. So that's the point. Extreme measures are justified by extreme means, and that is what they're pushing here. So that's why I mentioned earlier why chaos is a catalyst for the New World Order, right? For these extreme draconian reforms, because that is an extreme means, but it justifies the measures they need to take. Here's one example. A student, two elementary school students that are arguing in a cafeteria, right, is a different kind of danger. The staff members would approach that differently as opposed to two high school students where one pulls out a gun, right, and ends up now going rogue. Now you're not going to assign your principal to go and say, hey, go and talk to the guy, or go and grab him and just sit him down and give him a talking to. Cops will be called, right? Or if there was like a student making threats about a bomb, they would call the bomb squad. You would take more extreme measures because of the justification. Well, why did you call the SWAT team? Why did you call the police? Why did you call the bomb squad? Well, there was somebody saying that they were going to blow something up, or there was a bomb or something like that. As opposed to this kid was telling this other kid his mama is so fat, X, Y, and Z, and the other kid slapped him and blah, blah, blah. You're not going to call the SWAT team for that, right? So that's the point. The more extreme the situation is, the more justified you are in. What would happen if you called 911 and they say, 911, what's your emergency? You say, there are two kids arguing in the cafeteria in school right now. And they're probably waiting for you to say something more. Okay. Is there any particular thing going on, reason why you're calling 911 for this? Oh, no, they were just getting real loud with each other. And I just figured I'd call. You probably get hung up on, or maybe, whatever, right? So that's the whole point. And so to say like we're going to lock down the country, or we're going to declare martial law and actually bring in troops, enact curfews, possibly even use deadly force or lethal force, right? Or something of that sort, like to the level that you see in some of these dystopian futuristic movies. You need a great deal of chaos to justify that, to say we had to call in the UN troops, for example, right? Or we had to escalate it to this level because of how bad things got. That's why they have things like the Insurrection Act. That's why they have things like martial laws or states of emergency, and different protocols that would be enacted and used based on these different situations. Okay, so similarly, as we're reading here, by pushing a narrative like this to say this is a very dangerous path we're going down if Trump comes into office, you're likening him onto Hitler, to where people now think of even something more. Right now, whether he actually does have those aspirations or not is besides the point. Right, the point here is this is to justify anti-Trump plot, or whatever the case is. Okay. And as we've said before, really, we could care less who it is, so long as it's going to lead to prophecy either way. If it's Trump, then it was always meant to be him. If it's Harris, is always meant to be her, and whoever it is going to be the one that continues, passes. They take the baton and continue on, and further allow prophecy to flow. So at the end of the day, man, you know, doesn't really matter over here. Anyway, thus it is best understood in the context of recent accounts promising or urging violence after the November vote. For example, last week, the New York Times published a long interview with a scholar of fascism who declared Trump is a fascist. See, and then there's both sides. Okay, it's both sides. Now it says here the paper of record followed up with another long article by two Harvard professors calling for mass mobile. Now listen to this: mass mobilization in the event of a Trump victory. Mobilization of what? The proposal suggests that private industry join civil society organizations to ostracize Trump and his supporters and engage in large public protests to provoke a crisis. Kamala Harris herself, commenting on Kelly's allegations in the Atlantic story, claimed that her opponent is a fascist during a CNN town hall. So you're already seeing where this is going, right? These stories are only the latest in an ongoing series of media reports warning of a Trump dictatorship. Now, could he turn into a dictator? Hey, he could, right? He could. It's not always that dictators announce that they're going to become dictators, you know, and sometimes they do. But hey, if that's what's written in the books, then that's what's written in the books. um, so let me see if there's a bit more interesting stuff here. But this mainly covers the point, right? Yeah, let me actually get this part here. This part is also interesting. Uh, let's see 1 second. Because there's mention here about them trying to enact, I forgot what it is, section 3 or something along those lines, to invalidate, if Trump ends up winning, to say that his victory is invalid, having been part of an insurrection or a rebellion. um, you know that's pretty much where they're trying to go with it. So it says here, and these were here there were a couple of scenarios that were developed, or that were thought of concerning the election and the months or the weeks after that. So continuing with the article, it says here the most alarming scenario involves political and military officials resisting efforts to federalize their National Guard units and send them to quell anti Trump protests in U.S. cities. That is, the post election playbook calls for, or takes for granted, widespread violence so intense that the president invokes the Insurrection Act. The forecast posits a split in the senior ranks of the U.S. military after Trump replaces the chiefs of staff with officers who comply with his orders and deploy forces to put down the riots. Now, where it gets particularly interesting is if you now have a scenario where you're not dealing with um, just civilians against law enforcement, right? Where you had, like, say, the George Floyd protests, right? You had people and they were, chanting and throwing things and all of that, right? Against police in riot gear. Okay, that's one thing. But when you have a civil war or a divide in the military, right? Basically, you have two sides vying for power, and they're not going through the normal channels. This is where it gets more dangerous because now you can imagine, instead of, say, the National Guard against civilians, say, one side having riot shields, batons, tear gas, water cannons, and the other side having, rocks and bricks and, stuff like that. But now imagine what happens if that National Guard was split. Now both sides have guns. Both sides have shields. Both sides have tear gas and tanks and all of these things. So now there's something called like you can exchange fire. Right now things can get more dangerous. Okay, especially if you have something like the military or the National Guard that was divided, one side for this side, one side for the other. And you see that in the movie Civil War. All the gunfire that was being exchanged, it wasn't between just regular civilians and other civilians, though you had incidents of that. It was more so with military against military. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, anyway, see where I was at. This is where the political violence cultivated by the destructive left is leading. Blood-soaked streets and a divided military. The purpose of the Hitler narrative is to force members of the military to turn against Trump. After all, one second. After all, loyalty to the Constitution means fighting Hitler, not obeying his orders. Let's see what else is on here. I'm trying to find. Yes, I'll read this last part. On this view, Trump has polarized the country so profoundly that he is ultimately responsible for the attempt on his own life. This is basically the article says this is what the CNN narrative was as they tried to justify the assassination attempts and so on his life, right? But that is another inversion of reality, tailored to suit the bloodlust of a dark regime. It is the logic of terror. It is only the violence of our victims that drove us to slaughter them. After November 5th, this weaponized narrative could be expanded to justify violence on a mass scale designed to break the republic. Now, is this how it plays out? Let's see. Let's find out. I want to read this real quick. This is 2nd Ezra chapter 15, verse 15 or 14. Woe to the world and them that dwell therein, for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another. That is a divide. And swords in their hands, okay, which ranges from actual physical handheld weapons to guns, to tanks, to whatever means they use, okay. But in this case, you can imagine it being weapons that they're going to use one against another. Verse 16, for there shall be sedition among men, and we're already starting to see that, and you might see a lot more of that in the coming weeks and days. And invading one another, they shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. Guess what happens when you have a civil war? Guess what happens when you have civil unrest? Guess what happens when you have a civil divide? People don't regard the rulers. They don't regard those that are in authority. The people take matters into their own hands, and that's where the chaos, starts to you know, I'm blanking on words here, but it starts to just spew right out of control. But anyway, just wanted to bring that out. I figured that article was pretty interesting. Sure, that's not going to be the last one to come out around this topic as we get closer and closer to that time. So hey, as the scriptures say, be circumspect, watch, and keep an eye out, not just for like a civil war or just for situations of between Americans or the military, but now you also have foreign countries at play here, right? Foreign nationals. I think recently they said they found a Chinese national. I think it was in Michigan who tried to vote illegally, right? So there's a lot of different parts at play here. Anyway, with that, Lord willing, this was edifying and informative to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.